Hello, my name is Roman Havrylyuk from ORIL, and this is Innovation Blueprint podcast, where we explore everything PropTech, the tech landscape, PropTech startups, data, AI, IoT, and much more. And today we're joined by Bob Frady, the CEO and co-founder of PropertyLens, a platform that helps home buyers make better buying decisions. Happy to have you on the podcast, Bob. And to kick things off, please give us a brief overview of the company and your role at the company.
Sure. Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Roman. My name is Bob Frady. I am the co-founder and CEO of PropertyLens. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about how we came to be. We had a company that did natural hazard risk assessment, like floods and wildfires and all that stuff. And we sold it. And when we sold it, I had a chance to buy a house. So I went to buy a house and I looked for something that would tell me the history of this house because I walked up to it. I saw it twice before I had to make a decision on buying it. And it was not a cheap house. So there wasn't anything. And I knew from my hazard days that there were a lot of people who collected information like this. So we decided to pull it all together. And I used it to help negotiate the price of the house and discover some things that weren't disclosed in the real estate process. After we bought the house, I said, well, couldn't anybody use this? And the answer was yes. And so we built the company, and that's what PropertyLens is. It's like a home history report to tell you as much as we possibly can about the history of a property and the current status as well. You know, how old the systems are, all that good stuff. So yeah, just I wasn't content with retiring, and I'm a glutton for punishment. So I started another business.
And I appreciate you being, in the business, because that's what we want to move innovation forward. And PropTech is still relatively a young space compared to other larger industries. I'm often very surprised where how real estate technology is lagging behind something like fintech and adjacent areas of the technology landscape. So. Bob, I know that your primary customers would be home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, people that don't necessarily have experience, and that's kind of the obvious use case. And what I like to ask people that I speak with, what are some of the unexpected use cases where someone you would not normally say that it's a typical customer, but someone that used your platform in maybe not a traditional way to kind of benefit?
Sure. The biggest surprise that we've had is we have a guy who has 80 properties, and he pulls a property lens on each property so he can decide from an investor standpoint, which ones do I want to keep? Which ones do I want to sell? Which ones do I want to maintain and improve? So that was probably, he walked in, he's like, can I get 100 reports? And we're like, sure, here you go. And so that was probably the biggest surprise customer. And I think the investor community altogether is a fairly robust market for us. And that's the biggest surprise of all, is because investors don't care about the emotion of buying a house. They don't fall in love with the property. They fall in love with the dollars and saying, can I make money on this house? And are there any unexpected expenses that are hiding in this house that I can anticipate before I buy it? And so that piece of the community, it's small, but it's a significant piece of our business, where real estate investors all the time come to us and say, give me a report so I can make a better offer on this house. That's been the biggest surprise so far.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that the investors are the people that are the most versed in terms of understanding the value of this data and the insights, and your average customer might not necessarily be. So just curious, if what are you doing to educate some of your potential customers that don't even necessarily know what kind of data you can offer? And I can see on your webpage, and would love to dive into that, because you provide insurance risk, structure and condition, property overview, financial information. So how do you get through to some of these customers that don't necessarily know what's available?
It's hard. You know, it's hard to do that. So we try to simplify things as much as possible. And the tool that seems to be the most explainable to people is the expected repair expense over the upcoming 2 years. So we look at all the systems in a house. We try to determine how old they are by triangulating a whole bunch of data, and then say, here's the useful life in your area, and based upon the roof type or the system type, and here's how much it costs to replace, and here's how much you should budget for that replacement. Like this house, I've owned this house for 20 years. It's original build, and the HVAC system, which is getting repaired right now, is 20 years old. So it's at the end of its useful life, and we try to give people that insight. But it's hard, And the other thing is, the second surprise is that the first-time home buyer isn't our primary market. Our primary market is people who've bought a home before and have been burned by unexpected expenses. So they know that there's something hiding. They want to see, is there a tool that can help uncover something that might be hiding in the house? And that's where we come in with most of our customers. So that would be the biggest segment, then the investor, and then the first-time buyer is actually the smallest segment of our customer base, which is unfortunate because they should be the biggest, but
Mm-hmm.
it's people who've been burned before, whether they're investors or whether they're buyers, are the ones who understand the most about the value of the data.
It makes a lot of sense. Of course, the unexperienced part explains most of that, and that's why we also try to focus on educating some people in the ecosystem with that might be buyers, that might be property owners. That's one of the purposes of this podcast as well, just to kind of spread the word and
Sure.
help people out in this regard. So, since it's a technology focused podcast, I
Mhm.
would love to dive into some of your data insights. If you don't mind sharing, how do you typically collect data? Do you go directly and scrape public websites? Do you work with some of the partners? How much effort do you typically put into to this effort, basically?
When we look at our business, while we are a report company, we're really a data company. And there is data that we build versus data that we buy. So data that we build includes things like all the peril data, like floods and wildfires and all that stuff, fire station data, fire hydrant data, prior damaged property data. We scour the web to look for as much data as we can get, and then we transform a lot of that data, because there's a ton of data that's out there, but getting it into a consolidated data framework is hard. So there's that part. And then there's things like building permits, roof condition and satellite imagery, crime rates, things like that we get from partners that we integrate into the platform. And the benefit that we've had is we've done this before. With our old company that was primarily a B2B focused company, we built a lot of this data. So we are geospatial experts, for lack of a better term. But it's what we do, and everybody says building databases is easy, but getting those databases to talk to each other and to be consistent and to work together is a trick. That's a hard trick to master. And that's what we do. It's what we've done for most of our careers. And so the report basically goes out to our 90 data sources and then pulls it all together as part of our middle technology stack, if you will. And but yeah, maintaining that data set is the primary focus of what our development team does.
So thank you. And in terms of your data sets, you're obviously a consumer facing first company, but do you work with other businesses where they can potentially plug into your APIs and pull some of these reports and automate some of their processes? Do you do that?
It's funny that we didn't at first, because we didn't want to be a data company. And what happened is a lot of our customers that we had before came to us and said, we know you're messing around with data. Can you help us with data? So about a year ago, just a little bit over a year ago, we built our first API. And now we've got 53 customers signed up on the API, and the business is actually pretty robust. So yes, we do offer a series of different APIs depending upon what you need for our what we'll call our B2B customers. And whether it's an insurance company or an inspection company or some sort of company that needs this data, we can supply it for them as well.
Great, great. And our usual segment of our conversations is AI. You can't
Yeah.
avoid this topic. So I know that you founded the company several years ago, and
Mhm.
even though it's a relatively short timeline, but did AI impact your business? And I should say, how did AI impact your business? What changed? What changed in terms of your service offerings as well as internal operations?
Sure. AI has had a massive impact. AI is an interruptive technology, and there have really been three in my life that I can think of. The first was the web browser, the second was the mobile phone web combination, and then the third is AI. So it's an important and interruptive technology, and it's better to get ahead of it than get run over by it. So AI has impacted us in three areas. The first is coding. We are so much more efficient coding than we've been before because you can do dual coding where AI reviews your code, makes suggestions, everything goes faster, which is great. The second is that data, there's 8,000 different municipalities across the US. We collect data from about two-thirds of them. They're all in different formats. So getting that data to work together and be understandable to people, AI does a great job of helping to streamline the data that we have to make it presentable. So we use a lot there. And then the third is in decisioning. So when you look at a lot of the data that we have all the components, but AI adds the logic layer on top of it to say, okay, now here's what that means. So when you go into our report, you can say, what should my buying strategy be for this house? And we have an AI assistant that's built into our product that will tell you, okay, based upon everything that we see, here's what your strategy should be. We know whether it's a hot market or a cold market. We know when's the last time it was sold versus what's the market value. And so we can use it to make recommendations to people uh, that we couldn't before. So it has made us much, 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 much more efficient because frankly, a lot of stuff with AI you can do with rules, but you got to create a lot of rules and you got to manage all those rules.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
you'd use a combination of the two, and it makes things much, much more efficient. But it also opens up the door to somebody pointing at your website and saying, copy this and make me one that looks like it, which is a drag, but you still got to execute. So it's
So
it's it incredibly important.
on that point, obviously AI has changed the efficiency, but it changed the efficiency for everyone. And you, as you just alluded, companies trying to replicate business models. Uh, uh, how would you say you distinguish yourself, and what is your advantage over the companies that there's a lot of data companies out there. There's some companies providing AVMs and other
Mhm.
capabilities as well. So
Yep.
what makes you different, and how do you stay on top of your competition?
Sure. There's a couple. The first is that yes, there's a lot of data companies, but they're single channel or single focused data companies. Then there's compilers who just kind of throw everything together and hope for the best. Uh, Understanding all of that data, understanding how it's built, understanding how you can tweak it, how you can change it, how you can get different sources is something that is creative rather than machine oriented. And not a lot of companies have it. We can talk to our customers and they can say, this is the problem that I'm having. And I'm like, oh, we can do this and this and this and this and this, and we're done. And it works for us. So that data creativity is certainly job one. Um, the second is that our business model for our B2B customers is far different than if you're dealing with $1 billion company versus a startup. You have completely different business models. And that's probably one of the biggest surprises that we've seen is people come back to us because of our business model and our business practices. So everything is API based. There's no commitments that you have to make unless you want a discount. Then you make a commitment. You only pay for what you use, and we're constantly innovating. So those business reasons, people like to do business with us. And I think the last thing is we're always intensely curious about what comes next. How do we do a better job? How do we get better answers? How do we find different data sources? How do we build different data sources? How can we make things more efficient? Those are really soft qualities and not necessarily. Our advantage isn't in coding. Our advantage isn't in, how we manage things on a stack. It's how do we creatively help our customers to solve problems? And that's what we're really focused on.
Great, and I do believe that I agree with you. First of all, AI leveled the technological plane in many instances.
Hmm.
So if the goal is to outrun in terms of technology, your outrun your competition in terms of technology, it's a much harder game to play
Oh yeah, yeah.
at this
There's
moment.
always some 21-year-old who's like, "Ooh, what do I do with this?" And then boom, you have a
Yes.
new competitor. But the it's not. I always look at data as sort of a foundation. You can build a house, but if the foundation's terrible, then it's going to collapse.
Hmm.
And you go into some of these prop tech, top 100 things, and you click on their websites, and it's like out of business, out of business, out of business, because they're focused on building a structure without knowing what that structure is going to solve. And because we're a little older, a little more experienced, a little more pragmatic, we're like, what problem can we solve? And then how do we get the data to solve the problem? Is a much different way of approaching things than a lot of folks who say, I have this really cool idea, let's build it and see who buys it.
And by the way, on that note, have you noticed, let's say, uh, prop tech startups reaching out to you more often after the AI boom, whatever that is, let's say in the last 2 years compared to what happened before that?
It's not as much in the prop tech space as it is in the insure tech space,
Mm.
because a lot of people they know us and they trust us. The prop tech space is still emerging. I'm not even sure that anybody knows what the prop tech space actually is, except it involves property somehow. And you've got things like, how do I get a rent payment automated versus how do I judge the safety of a building? Two completely different topics that are both contained in the prop tech space.
Hmm.
So, and we look at ourselves as a data company that lives in the prop tech world, not as a prop tech company per se, which is really aggravating when you talk to investors. They're like, you need to put a stake in the ground. I'm like, no, 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 no. We're a data company. We happen to build prop tech and insure tech products.
I would say I 100% agree with you because we work in prop tech, and the breadth of this landscape is just too broad. It's basically anything that goes from analytics, construction, all the way to property management and rental, and that is just too broad of a field to say we're in prop tech, because it's kind of anything, as you said, anything related to buildings, to
Yeah,
lived in environment.
I'll give you an example. The house I had a construction loan on it, and I had to have it refinanced because it ran out of time. And after doing a pretty significant renovation to a house, I had an appraiser come out and tell me that the house was worth less than what I paid for it, even though I had put 50% of the value of the house into an improvement. And so then I ran it through our data, and then I ran it through some AI, and I came up with actually an accurate assessment of what this house was worth in 5 minutes on my computer versus paying $1,900 to a professional appraiser that the systems trust. It's like they were so far wrong, it was almost laughable how wrong they were. And I think that those pieces of the prop tech space are the ones most prime for disruption. The problem is that your trust company or your title company isn't necessarily going to accept an AI generated valuation until they get to the point of feeling comfortable enough that it actually works. It's just there's so much room for disruption in so many pieces of the process. But
So on
people are wedded. People are wedded to the past.
So on that note, moving into the future and vision, a portion of our podcast, what are the some of the challenges or biggest disruptors that you anticipate in the next couple of years in
I
this
think
industry?
the biggest challenge, when you buy a property, there's a realtor involved, and that realtor doesn't want you to know all the things that we can tell you about a property. And so are they are focused on selling the dream, and we're a little bit more focused on buying the reality.
Mm,
And that piece of the business is not yet at the point where they understand that more disclosure is better rather than worse. Because once we view buying a house as like the circus comes to town. It's all very exciting. There's people coming through, but then at the end, after the elephants leave, the buyer has to live in that house and has to live with all the issues in that house. And yeah, they weren't disclosed, or yeah, things happen, surprise, surprise. But in our research, more than 40% of buyers end up with a repair that is massively going to strain their budget that we could have told them about before they bought the house. So they
I
go in
th-
prepared.
I think that is actually a trend because also on the regulatory side,
Hmm.
I think probably about the Fee Transparency Act that just
Hmm.
was rolled out fairly recently. It's related to the rentals, but it's kind of a similar theme conversation here because
Hmm.
you need to know what's your cost going to be when you're renting at the end of the day and when you're buying a home. And I believe that there's probably some regulatory mm, space for that as well, I guess.
Well, it's state by state. The number one thing that people should remember is that when you're buying a house, it's always buyer beware. It's like that's it. It's buyer beware, regardless of the disclosures, regardless of the law. You don't really have any recourse. Post settlement lawsuits are really hard to win. So state by state, they're changing things, though. For example, in Florida, you now have to disclose whether the property's been flooded before. Never had to do that until last year. In Massachusetts, they just passed a law that said you cannot waive the inspection contingency. Because when markets are really hot, people say, I'll do it without an inspection. No inspection contingency. Can't do that anymore. So it changes in pieces. Like, did someone die in the house is only a California disclosure. One other state requires it if it was within 3 years. Those are things that happen state by state.
Hmm.
But getting the industry to the point where, hey, these are good things to do, just like a Carfax report. When Carfax first came out, car dealers hated it. They're like, this is just going to interrupt my sale. And we see the same thing with PropertyLens. And that's okay. It's just part of the genesis of growing a business. If it was easy, anybody would do it. But getting them to the point where they understand this is a good thing to be proactive about with the house that I'm listing is part of our challenge over the next 2 to 3 years, and what I'm looking excited to try to tackle.
And I think for many brokers, it might seem to be a good idea to maybe hide some of the details or not disclose all of the details. But at the end of the day, if you're very transparent with the way you communicate with your potential customers, you can build more trust with them, and they trust you more if you say, "Hey, this home needs a lot of repair. Let me help you look into something else." Right?
Trust, but verify. That's
Yeah.
the that's the statement we like to use. It's like, because listen, when you buy a house, a lot of times you're buying a dream. It's to fulfill something in your life, and that's a very emotional decision. And real estate agents, to their credit, understand that and play upon that to make you fall in love with the house. Imagine your kids are over here, and imagine this and imagine that. And we tell people the worst time to make a multi-$100,000 decision is when you first fall in love. Like, It's a terrible time to make big decisions when you first fall in love, whether it's real estate or whatever else. And so we want to give them a reality check to say, hey, it's great to fall in love with this place. It looks really good. Or, yeah, you might want to bring your hard hat to this one, to the
Hmm.
negotiating table. So that's the space that we live in.
Okay, and on the emotional side, and we'll start to wrap up after that. On the emotional side, I'm just curious whether you know what your customers, especially the buyers themselves, not necessarily the investors, what data points are they looking at the most? What's their primary focus? And in contrast to that, what would you say should be their primary focus? I know that there's a ton of parameters there.
I think their primary focus is how much is this, like, what's hiding here that I'm not aware of? And that's a big space. And because there's so many things that could be happening with the house. Uh, that's the primary reason, is to guard against an unexpected surprise. I think that, and I'll give you an example. A friend of mine bought a house down in Nashville last month. So I ran the reports for him and I said, this house has a soil problem and they've done a lot of improvements, but there's no permits that are associated with them. I said, whatever you do, don't waive the inspection contingency. So they had it inspected, and it turns out that it's all built on crawl spaces down in that area. The middle of the house was collapsing because the work wasn't done right, and it was a $75,000 repair. Now, he had the owner do part of it. He got a credit at the end of the day to do the rest of it. But it was one of those things where if nobody had said something, he never would have known. And that's the kind of stuff that we're guarding against.
It's basically pointing out the holes. You don't know what the hole might be in this
Oh,
evaluation process.
the realtor lit me up like a Christmas tree. She was not happy. And I'm like,
Mm.
I'm not making a quality assessment here. I'm just telling you what the conditions are, and these are things you need to be looking out for.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love that. So, Bob, as we wrap up this conversation, looking into the future, are there any interesting initiatives, data points, or any interesting developments that you'd like to share with the audience? And also, where do you see the company in the next 1, 3, 5 years?
In terms of things that are interesting, we have a new version of our report coming out in September, and it's designed to be much more interactive than it has in the past. So you can ask any question that you want to of the report, and it'll give you an intelligent answer. So the ability to interact with the data and to answer any question that you have is going to be much greater a month from now than it is today. So I think the continual integration of LLMs as they get smarter and better into the data is going to be the biggest development over the next couple of years. I think that from where we want to be, 1, 3, and 5 years, this is a slog. This is a long walk through the desert with a small cup of water. And we're okay with that. We're used to it. So I think in 1 year, we'll be profitable. We'll be twice the size as we are now. We'll be more robust. In 5 years, I would like to see 30% of all home sales have a Property Lens report attached to them, uh, just so people understand exactly what they're getting themselves into. That would be a good ending. I would be very happy with that ending.
Love that. Almost setting a standard for the industry for home valuations in some
I
sense.
think I think that's what we want to be. We want to be the standard that just like a Carfax for a car, you want to have a Property Lens for property.
Love that. Thank you, Bob. And we'll end at this note. Check out propertylens.com for more information about the company's services, and subscribe to our channel to see more discussions with leaders that shape PropTech today. Thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure
Thank
talking
you.
with you.
Thank you, Roman. You too.
Thank you.